And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Massimo Barbato, best known for co-producing I Am Henry, a short film about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, which is featured on Amazon Prime. Massimo has also had a near-death experience where he encountered angelic beings, which we're going to learn about and more. Massimo, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for inviting me onto your show. Nice to meet you.
Well, Massimo, let's start on the day that you died and go from there.
Okay, well, back in December 2021, my family was struck down with COVID really badly. And three members of my family, my mother, my sister, and myself, ended up in hospital. But I got very seriously ill and I ended up in ICU. And for a week, they tried everything to kind of raise my oxygenation levels, but without success. And Christmas Day, I was told that, I was on 100% oxygen. It wasn't sustainable, and the only option was to intubate me and induce me into a coma. At that point, I'd kind of given in and just sort of resigned myself to fate, really. What option did I have? And I kind of vaguely remember saying farewell to my loved ones, my family, my partner. But after that, it became, obviously I was obviously induced into the coma, and the coma lasted for 3 weeks. So I was out for the count on Christmas Day and woke up, I think it was January the 15th, completely bewildered. Probably in shock, actually. I think I had post-traumatic stress as well, because I found myself tied to the incubator, and also I couldn't speak. I had a tracheoscopy. I was fed through a drip and I couldn't move. And I spent a total of about 6 weeks in ICU. I think I was the sickest person there. And very critical at one stage, probably up until towards the end of the coma. I was at a very critical stage. The doctors told my family to prepare for the worst. And it was just by chance they had maybe changed some tubing and given me a different drug that my vital signs started to improve towards the end of the coma. So that was a big relief for them, but it was a very dark period for my family. During the coma itself, I mean, how can I explain this without it sounding like, really sort of far-fetched? But it felt like I was sort of in a kind of a simulation, but not just one, but many. So in a way, it was like being in another dimension, and my consciousness was very aware of what was taking place. And I was being shown different stories, timelines, that kind of, some of them reflected my own personal life, and featured some of the members of my family. Others were more a kind of reflection of the future of humanity. And others were very mystical, in the sense that I sort of encountered various angelic beings and scenarios that were pretty incredible, actually. I found myself in one of the scenarios in a kind of a waiting area, which I thought was really interesting. It felt like being in the lobby of a big grand hotel, a luxury hotel, and I was lying on this velvet kind of seating area, looking up at this sort of ceiling that had mirrors. And I was looking at myself, but I noticed around me there were other people. There was a young woman who was doing something to my left. A man walked in front of me. So there were other people in this waiting area, but I couldn't understand what I was doing there, but maybe it was just sort of like give me some sort of rest from what my body was probably experiencing in the coma, in the hospital. But I was trying to communicate at the time with my partner telepathically because nothing was verbalized. Everything was telepathic in this kind of dimension. And I could not communicate. Yeah, and that was very strange. But as I said, I was sort of jumping from one scenario to another. It was amazing. It was like being in a movie, but you are the sort of central character, or you were an observer. So it was like I was observing others going through a scenario. Um, and as I said, some of them were personal to me, but others were more a sort of reflection on maybe the direction humanity is taking, and particularly involving artificial intelligence. I had this several visions in a way, or dreams, if you like, where it was apparent that I was in a future timeline. I was in a hospital in the future, strapped to a bed and almost like part machine. I felt like I was part AI and part human. And the doctors were androids. They were not human, and they lacked empathy, and they couldn't relate to my human emotions. They almost like looked at me like an alien, and I thought, this is not right, and I didn't want to be there. And I said, I don't want to become AI. And I left that scenario, but there were others that involved AI quite dramatically. I was shown that we are sort of at a crossroads. Humanity is sort of at a crossroads between choosing to preserve our organic DNA, and the alternative is a future controlled by artificial intelligence. And we have to make a collective choice. Which path do we take? That was very clear to me. That was the choice we have to make. The organic timeline, if you like, was to preserve the human DNA, but in doing so, we would kind of almost flourish. We would enter into a kind of a golden age where humanity would kind of really sort of accelerate their consciousness into almost like becoming aware of sort of the galactic picture of our existence. So we're not just sort of stuck on Earth, but we're starting to forge sort of connections in space with other sort of, existences. To elaborate on that, there was a scenario, a simulation, if you like, where I was one of seven. I would describe them as being sort of entities, maybe archangels. They definitely had wings, but I was one of seven that were captured by a group of scientists. And we had somehow been discovered. So we were around the Earth for many thousands of years. But in this scenario, we had been discovered, and these scientists had transported us to a particular location in order to sort of present us to the world as a kind of a missing piece of our kind of like history. Now, I can remember having the feeling of having two sets of teeth, which I thought was really very strange. And I could feel that really strongly. And we were strapped into this sort of being transported, but each of the beings had kind of like colors, and I particularly had turquoise and yellow as my particular sort of aspect, but the others had different colors and musical sounds, which in tandem together, we kind of created a kind of like a piece of music, which was almost like sort of releasing a kind of like celestial knowledge in a way. And the presentation, once we were presented, this music kind of like sort of opened up this understanding that we were not alone in the universe. And I could see, looking up at the sky, all the stars were lit up and sort of shining, and you could see the connections that we had with other parts of the universe. I thought that was really profound, actually, and it felt like it could have been potentially what we're coming into, an understanding of our true history. In another reality, like I said, the artificial timeline, the artificial intelligence timeline showed me aspects where human life was not really valued. And in that timeline, AI was sort of in control of a lot of things. And if you were kind of like sick, or as a human, if you were sick, or you had you were not valued, and so you were kind of like disposed of in that reality, which was not pleasant to see. So not all of it was pleasant, but as I said, I was kind of observing this, and it was kind of like being shown that we are at a kind of a crossroads in terms of the direction we have to choose. Do we go down this organic timeline where we preserve our DNA, but in the process we elevate our consciousness to this kind of more cosmic reality, or do we go down this kind of road of an artificially intelligence controlled society where we may not have that freedom? Yeah, and the mystical visions I had were pretty profound. I think this was probably when I got at my most sickest, actually, when I was really, really poorly, and the doctors didn't think I would recover. I was shown Christ on the cross, actually, at the time of his crucifixion, and it was really profound. It was like seeing it up close. It was like I was there visually seeing him on the cross, but around him were the archangels that were fighting off very dark forces to try and sort of protect him. And I saw his mother holding his body at the foot of the cross, which is the kind of, I'd seen this sculpture in Rome, in the Vatican, called La Pietà, which is a very famous sculpture by Michelangelo, and it was exactly that image. It was her holding his body at the foot of the cross, and I don't know. I think that was when I was really at the most critical point in the coma. But I later learned actually that a lot of people were praying the Rosary for me at the time, which is a prayer in Catholicism, which can, and one of the scenes of the Rosary is that particular one I had. So I don't know if there is a connection there. But yeah, so that kind of sums up a little bit about what I experienced, and that's just a fraction of it. There were many more kind of like dreams and visions, but I think those were the most profound, I think.
Massimo, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. At this point, do you think that seeing the future was a message for you to send the world of possibilities, or do you think that it's already been set, like we are definitely going into an AI world?
I don't think it's set. I think what I believe, and this is what I kind of understood from what I was shown, is that it's a collective choice that we have to each, as individuals, but as a collective, have to make. So at the moment, I think we're very unaware. A lot of people are very asleep to artificial intelligence. It's suddenly exploded this year, with all the kind of apps that are available online, which is quite strange actually, because my NDE was sort of towards the end of 2021, and people were not really thinking about artificial intelligence then. So this has all happened since. So in a way, it could have been a prophetic kind of vision. But I saw it as being two competing timelines, the organic, which is where we preserve our DNA, and the one that takes us to a kind of controlled future where artificial intelligence is almost locking us into a kind of a virtual reality, sort of like a matrix. But I believe I was shown the potential for us to create a golden age. Even though the world is in a real state at the moment, I do believe that potential is there. And I think that what I think I experienced in the coma is that we co-create I co-created those realities with my consciousness. And in a way, they were kind of almost like I was part of that. I was part of creating those kind of experiences. So, and in that dimension, I don't think they're, I think you are kind of shown your potential really, in a way that we're not really accessing here in the physical. So yeah, I think we have a choice to make, and I think it's going to have to be made quite soon.
Do you think it's possible there will be parallel realities and both will exist, and it's just up to you to choose the one you'd like to go to?
Yeah. Well, Jeff, that's an interesting perspective. It could well be. I think anything is possible. I really believe that anything is possible. But I have a strong feeling about this idea of a golden age and the idea of the organic human sort of evolving into this kind of almost sort of supernatural human, where we have these connections with the kind of a galactic history that we are not being shown at the moment. And I think that there is I think our future lies where in a kind of a situation where artificial intelligence is supportive of organic life, but it's not controlling it, if that makes sense. It's supporting it and helping us to grow and evolve, but it's not controlling our evolution. And I feel that quite strongly, actually. So yeah.
Did you see aliens during any of your experiences?
And that's an interesting one because I had several dreams where I was definitely in a future timeline. And I was traveling in a kind of a craft, and we were sort of traveling in space to other parts of the solar system with ease. I mean, it was kind of just like going on a vacation, going on holiday. These experiences were really accessible to people. Now, in terms of alien encounters, no, I didn't see specifically anything like that. But I had a distinct feeling that we were going to understand that there are other kind of like life. There is other life out there, and that part of I'm thinking in my lifetime we will discover that as a race. So it felt quite strong to me that we are part of something bigger than what we understand at the moment.
I've had a significant number of experiencers wind up in some sort of waiting room.
Yeah,
So it's fascinating to hear another one.
yeah.
You felt like it was a place of resting?
As I said, it was a mix. It was definitely a mix. I mean, some of the particular vision I described to you there, being in a waiting area, was very relaxing. I had another one where I was traveling in a very futuristic aircraft to another part of the world in sort of like hours, but I was literally traveling in such comfort, and I felt that really strongly that this was accessible in the future to people to travel like this in some sort of like in a kind of technology that we haven't invented yet, but it's going to come. It will eventually be created, and there will not be poverty and things of that nature. It will be almost a given that you will travel in that kind of comfort and security. I felt that really strongly. So there were elements of feeling safe and protected, and but there were those other visions where I was really seeing quite sort of dark, maybe dystopian future timelines, possibly, like the hospital in the future that I described, which was AI controlled and not very empathic towards humans, and those kind of elements. Yeah, so.
After experiencing all this, do you
mm.
feel that our current reality is a simulation?
It's interesting because after I came out of the coma and I sort of recovered and came out of that, I started to see more and more people talking about that. The idea that we live in a holographic universe, perhaps, or a kind of a simulated reality. And I have to say, there's an element of truth to it. Having experienced what I have, I actually think that that's probably the case, but it's so complex for us to really grasp. I mean, what I experienced was other sort of dimensions, but I was a co-creator within that because those stories, those visions were like, I was kind of like the critical part of it. And and I was shown these kind of elements, specifically. So the idea of it being possibly that this reality is part simulated, then I believe, yes, and I think we co-create the reality that we're in. I think that's the truth of it. And I think there is an element of truth to that, actually. Yeah.
If you compare your experiences to our reality, is one of them more real than the other?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, because in these simulations that I call them, these kind of visions I was a part of, it felt very real. Um, and it was like, it was like being in the movie. It was being in the movie and seeing it and up in color and being a real part of it. In some ways, I think it did feel sort of more real than life, this sort of physical reality. I think we're quite kind of limited here in a way. We don't have full access to our potential. And maybe that's partly suppressed because of the environment that we're living in, and obviously how we're educated and everything to think a certain way. But I have a feeling that's all going to change. I do believe in a positive future, even though it may not look like it at the moment. I do have hope that we can sort of transition towards this kind of more enlightened way of existence, really. But I do think there is a cosmic connection coming, that we will come into a kind of almost like a revelation. It will be revealed to us like a revelation. And the idea of this organic timeline is the one that I think would benefit us choosing in terms of protecting ourselves, and not becoming something else that may not be a good sort of outcome.
Do you have an estimate of when these changes will start happening?
I think the changes have already started. I think my feeling is that maybe the chaos that we're kind of seeing all around us is an aspect of that. I think it has to kind of reach a kind of a critical point where people have to question, what are we doing? Because it feels like a lot of the decisions that are being made for us, really, or we are taking ourselves, are taken unconsciously. And in a way, I believe that we have to kind of almost reach a kind of a critical point where we have to take, or some event happens that makes us awaken to, what we are actually about, and the idea of, creating a reality that we can all be part of, connected to, and sort of enjoy, really.
Since your experience, you've had time to process it,
Yeah.
maybe not enough, but since then, have you come up with some general life conclusion? Like, where do
Yeah.
you go with your life from here?
I think I'm still processing everything, but I felt during the recovery period after the coma, I felt very strongly that by focusing your awareness, or my awareness, in the present moment, that was the best way to access these other realms and the kind of the guidance and support that we have, that we may not see, but is around us at all times. I do think there is a design to this reality and to us being alive. But I think the access point is in the present. And I realized that when I was recovering, because after waking up from a coma, you suffer from post-traumatic stress, you go through major sort of trauma, your body recovering. But by focusing my awareness in that present moment, I realized I could see almost like little miracles happening. And I felt a sense of peace that I carried forward with me during that recovery period, which was very stressful in many ways, because I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to, breathe on my own again. And that took a lot of time and rehabilitation. So living in the present moment, I think, is very, very important, and accessing that wisdom, that guidance that is all around us is the way. That's the access point, really. So
Have the memories of these experiences faded over time?
no, they haven't faded. I mean, it's coming up to 2 years now since I had these experiences, And I can only say that they are still with me every day. I try to sort of, make sense of it and see it as perhaps a gift I was given. As I said, in a way, the experience was like a reset for me. And in a way, a second chance. I was given a second chance. So, as I said, it's probably still early in the stage of processing everything and what I'm sort of going to be doing with the rest of my life. But I think a lot of that maybe actually involve writing and incorporating some of those ideas, particularly in the next book that I'm co-authoring, the idea of the organic and AI sort of timelines and the kind of the challenges, the ethical challenges of artificial intelligence and everything else that's kind of tied into that is going to be featured in that particular novel. So yeah, it was an extraordinary experience, and something that you never probably really can fully grasp or understand, but
Well,
we'll
you could,
see.
I don't know if this is a good idea, but you could turn some of this AI stuff into a really dystopian
Yeah.
novel like 1984.
In a way, yeah, that particular book is very sort of pivotal to that particular sort of vision of the future I was shown, actually. This idea of being controlled by an external force and not really having the freedom to be your true self. And I think that is something that we have to become very aware of. I'm not saying that all artificial intelligence is bad. I think it can actually be very helpful to help us move towards a more enlightened society, but not one that's controlled purely by it. And I think that that's something we have to sort of learn to be and become aware of more and more, particularly over the next few years, I think.
I recently had a guest and we were talking about aliens and stuff like that.
Mm.
And we were talking about how at some point in the future, we may become the pets of aliens. They may
Yeah.
take over this planet and we become their pets.
Yeah.
I don't know if we could become pets of AI, but does that
Yeah.
resonate with you at all?
Oh, I mean, goodness knows, anything is possible, isn't it? I think with artificial intelligence, the interesting thing is we're not there yet, but I think once it can think for itself, then we have basically created another form of life in a way. A tool that can think for itself has never been invented before.
Mm-hmm.
And that has unforeseen consequences. So, obviously at the moment, we're kind of working sort of on in the early stages of working with AI, but who knows, it could end up being that way. But it's difficult to tell. I think anything is possible. I think, as I said, I think we're faced with two potential futures, but which one do we, they're all sort of both competing at the moment. And I think we have to kind of choose the one for ourselves. I think that and make a sort of a conscious choice of how we want to kind of move forward.
I think if we ever become a spacefaring people, at
Yeah.
some point we could encounter AI robots that outlived their biological predecessors.
Yeah, that's probably very true because obviously in the digital sense, that data exists potentially forever. You don't, and I think, that there is an element maybe in society that wants to merge with AI to kind of create that existence to last forever, so, that's an option, isn't it? I think some people may want that. Whether it will benefit them in the long run, who knows? I really don't see that. But I think for me, I think the AI aspect in support of human life is probably going to help us discover what is out there in the universe and make those connections with our sort of galactic history that maybe we aren't really fully aware of at the moment. So it's definitely a potential for us to kind of maybe see in our future, future sort of timeline.
Do you think you got any gifts from this experience that could be considered psychic?
Yeah, I think a deeper understanding of life and death. As I said, in the coma, I experienced my own death at one point. and a rebirth, actually. I was, oh gosh, I forgot to tell you, but I was pushed through a kind of a womb-like situation. It was like I felt like I was in the womb again, and I was literally pushed out into reality again. I think that's probably when I woke up, but it did feel like a rebirth. But I think in terms of a sensitivity, maybe an empathy, definitely those elements are strengthened when you've been through something like that. My mother passed away earlier this year, and I witnessed her sort of transition, but I felt very strongly that I was there to kind of help her go through that process, and I wasn't afraid of it for her or for, as I had experienced things that I knew, that it wasn't the end. There is a reality outside of this reality. So, and I think she took comfort from that, actually. So that was something to maybe understand.
Do you fear death at all?
I don't think I do, because I faced it, and literally, I was very, very critical at that point. Yeah, so I can honestly say I don't fear death. I mean, obviously, I think there are elements of it that are not very pleasant, and obviously, I wouldn't enjoy wouldn't enjoy those. And having experienced the recovery side of what I experienced was hard. It was difficult. But no, I don't think so. No, I don't think there's any need to fear it. It is a transition. And I think it's going to be unique for each individual. I think it's something that's going to be special to each individual.
I think there may be some people who will write in the comments that these are just
Mm.
hallucinations while being on coma medication.
Yeah, yeah. I've
What
heard
would
that,
you
yes.
say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, isn't it? But I can honestly say that during that period, that 3 week period, my consciousness was somewhere. I was living these realities. As I said, some were set in the past, some were in the present, some were in the future, and it was all kind of intertwined. Um, and there is something to be said for you can't necessarily rationalize those experiences, because they were very real, and it's not something that you can sort of rationalize away. Obviously, there's an element of that, but I think the mind, had created these sort of simulations in a way for a reason.
You've had many simulations. What is the one that affected you the most, that you think about day after day?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think it's the optimistic one, the one where the sky lit up with all the stars connecting, and the idea that we are part of this greater cosmic reality, this history, and it's all waiting to be discovered. I think that for me really kind of symbolizes, you know, what we are perhaps as a humanity, and where our destiny lies, really, beyond this sort of narrow sort of physical existence, but in a more cosmic one.
Do you feel that you've changed spiritually or religiously since your experience?
Yeah, I think I've always had a faith, and I think that may be tied to the visions I had of Christ and Mary and the angels, maybe. Um, In terms of I would say I'm more aware that there is spiritual support there for all of us if we want it. And it is a case of tapping into it. As I said, I think you've got to ground your awareness very much in the present, and then just sort of reach out to it, because it is there. And you will be given signs. I mean, I saw many during my recovery period, doing that. So I think, if anything, I've become much more aware of that help and support that is there. So we are never totally alone. We've always got access to, support, sort of help beyond this reality, if you like. It's there, and I think grounding yourself in the present is the way to access it, I think.
Has any of your family, friends, or spouse commented to you since the experience that said, hey, Massimo, I don't know what it is, but you're a different person now?
I wouldn't say necessarily that. I think they was really glad and happy that I recovered from, something that potentially would have taken me out of this life. The odds were stacked against me. As soon as I knew I was going to be intubated, I knew I had a 50% chance, but that 50% dropped to almost zero at one point. So the fact that I've come back, I think they're just really, surprised at how resilient I was to come through that without much damage. Potentially I could have been very sick, very, very damaged by it. So in terms of like transformation, I would say it's I'm a work in progress like everybody else. I think, you still have to live your life. You've still got bills to pay. The reality of life hits you, particularly when you come out of a long stay in hospital and rehab. But that whole experience, as I said, was a lesson for me in many ways, I think, to show me that we are, that this reality, there's much more to this reality than we understand. Put simply, I think all of these experiences show that and indicate that, and it's not down to coincidence or purely medical drugs that induce those experiences. I think there is more to it. There is much more to it. And that, humans are naturally curious, and I think it's a great thing to want to kind of explore that more and understand that in greater depth. And maybe, we're at a pivotal time in our sort of evolution in terms of our on this planet where we have to reach out to, bigger ideas, new ways of thinking, concepts that maybe might have seemed too sort of fantastical in the past, but maybe has elements of reality to it. I think, there is a lot to look forward to, and I think that's the something that we shouldn't forget. We're constantly changing and evolving.
I realized that you didn't feel like you connected with your partner when you were trying to speak telepathically, but did your partner have some kind of effect?
Yeah, definitely. There was one particular night, I think, when I was very much at the critical point. In the middle of the night, he was physically woken up by me. He knew it was me, and I literally pushed him awake. Because in the coma, I was just frantic with trying to communicate, and I couldn't get my voice heard or get the sort of acknowledgement. So yeah, that was definitely a sign that my consciousness was out of my body, and it wasn't. There was some sort of element of that connection there. So,
Were you shown anything of our current timeline?
yeah, interestingly enough, I was, and what I was shown was that the fact that it's kind of a timeline that sort of stems back thousands of years, but it is coming to an end. It's a controlled timeline, very much in the hands of a few. There was an aspect where I was taken to a big house in the countryside, actually. I can reveal this. And up, in this big manor house in the middle of the country was a library at the top in the loft area. And it was just a huge library of books that this particular group of people had kind of mastered in order to kind of control the kind of dynamics in this reality, but for their own gain. But that's all coming to an end. And as I said, we're now faced with a choice. I believe, choosing a positive future is something that we have to make, each of us on an individual level.
All right. Anything else?
I was also shown the tree in the Garden of Eden, believe it or not. But I think that was associated with the timeline, the organic one, where we are going to kind of sort of reset. If we choose that path, we will actually almost like reset the original plan, the blueprint for our development, which is this kind of very supernatural kind of being that we have the potential to become. I think that was the element that I missed in that.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they contact you?
Well, I have a link tree which is associated with the book I Am Henry, which has access to Instagram, Facebook. You can contact me through those channels.
I'll put
That
the
would
link
be-
in the description.
Okay.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I think the message I'd leave is to know that you have support. It's there all around you. You have to access it through the present moment to stay very calm and still within yourself on a daily basis, and to sort of ground that in nature, to try and reconnect with nature. I think that's very important, particularly in this kind of chaotic age that we're living in, which is very much driven by technology. I think it's important to kind of reconnect and rediscover those kind of aspects of our nature that we've forgotten, and to reconnect to those.
Massimo, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.